Welcome to the Non-Standard Podcast. I'm your host, Manny Lampson. If this is your first time listening or your 50th time listening, this is what to expect on this episode. We dive into the concepts of developing your leadership toolbox. Why do you need this? You need this in any situation to help manage, lead, and control, and ultimately win. How do you do that? You can't use the same form of leadership in everything you do. So every episode, we dive into my leadership philosophy. We dive into the story and the background of the person we're talking to. And we also dive into some leadership traits I have accrued throughout the years. And then we also follow it up with a book review at the end. So you're getting a wide range of leadership topics and traits that you can add to your kit. So without further ado, let's go into the recap of this episode. And afterwards, if you love it, like it, share it, follow it, give us some feedback because we're only just getting started. On this episode with my man, Ben, who I recently went through the TACPO assessment phase 2 selection week with, where we both actually failed. He ended up going back through again and getting selected. So he's currently in the process of going through his senior year of the academy. When he graduates, he'll go through the schoolhouse and continue that journey. But we talked about what it's like growing up for him, playing sports, having those mentors and leaders, what traits he saw in them, like empathy, reliability, genuine, leading by example. We also dive deep into a couple leadership traits, like to be selfless, you have to be selfish, building relationships based off trust and care, and really just understanding the process of finding people around you to surround yourself with to build better habits, and also being great at the little things in life. Enjoy. Let me know if you have any questions. All right, everybody, we're ready. Just like you heard in the intro, I got my man Ben with me, and we are going to get this show going. So, Ben, just like everybody's heard before, we start with the 3 H's. Hometown, heroes, hardship. It's just a great way for people to get to see you a little bit more personable before we jump into like the tactics and leadership and military and stuff like that. So, lay it on us, because there will probably be some follow-on questions I'll have after. So, hometown, your heroes, and some hardships.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks for having me. I'm from New York City, born and raised. Kind of different growing up than a suburban or rural area, for sure. Moved around a little bit in the New York area, but I claim New York City. And then 2 heroes, I would say, cliche answer, but definitely my dad. He's like my best friend. Talk to him like every day. And we've been through a lot together. And he's a lot of the reason, like, I do what I do. And then I would say on a sports side, I'm a big sports fan. I'd say Derek Jeter. I grew up a big Yankee fan. And, his nickname is the Captain. And he always wasn't like the most athletic guy, but he was the most professional. I would say he was a leader, given the name the Captain. And just someone that, like, as a kid, you kind of look up to. Like, if you grow up in New York, the Yankees were always solid. And he was, like, the forefront for 20 years, essentially. So he was probably, like, one of my heroes. And then hardship, I mean, I was with you. We went through Top T together, and I did not get selected the first time. And I thought I did, what I had to do. And so, that was definitely a tough experience. But I learned a lot from it, but definitely something like more in my adult life that, taught me a lot, got a lot of good feedback. And so, yeah, I would definitely say that one in recent memory.
So was that one of your biggest, I still consider it a failure on my end, even though we didn't necessarily fail, right? We made it all the way through. We just didn't get selected.
Yeah.
And so was that one of your biggest, I guess, failures or, things you've had throughout playing sports or anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, for sure. Like, I've lost big games or I've come up short, playing wise and stuff like that. But that was something that, like, I put a lot of pressure on myself, almost to a detriment. And so when I got the no, I was really, like, disappointed in myself, right? So I was like, I'm a failure. I messed up. And, I felt like that for a while, but then I tried to kind of shift my thinking into, like, okay, we still made it through the week. I got a lot of good feedback, and I have the ability to go back. I'm still young. And I thought that the feedback that I received was more, things that I can work on in the future. And I tried to have the frame of mind of like, I'd rather get this feedback now while I'm young and I'm not in charge of anybody yet in the real Air Force. That rather than when I'm older in charge of men and women, like where I could actually get someone in trouble or God forbid killed. So at first, yeah, it was definitely like I failed. Like I expected a lot. I prepared. And so I felt like I didn't do enough. Right. But over time, I shifted my frame of mind to thinking more of like a learning experience, you know?
Yeah, I think it took me, man, it took me probably a good month to really shift towards, what happened, why did it happen? I
Right.
remember calling my wife right after, just like bawling my eyes out because I put as literally everything I could into that week, and
Right.
she's a little more religious than I am, so she was really big on just like, hey, everything happens for a reason, it sucks. Um, and so I went through a few weeks where I was just like, oh my God, like this is ridiculous. Then, like you, I just had this shift like, okay, it didn't happen. What, where, why, everything has a reason. And then, it clicked, I was like, okay, well, we got this new house. I got this new job here at Dias. We're staying here. But yeah, it did take quite a while because I don't know, people don't realize what it's like when you're working with and battling next to people that are the top tier of any physical, mental leadership aspect that I've worked with in my 18 years in the military that you've seen from your aspect. It's hard. Like I
Yeah, for
still get
sure.
goosebumps when I talk to people about it. Is one of the best training environments I've ever been through. Like I learned so much about myself. Like you said, you caught stuff early in your career, right? So you're developing those skills now. Like for me, it was hard because I've been in for so long. So to get
Right.
some of that feedback, I was like, dang, why couldn't I get that when I was, joining the military the first year in? But I needed it. For me, there were some good humbling moments. My I say passion, but my frustration is obviously one of the things, and I think that comes with age, because I've been through some tough things. I've worked really hard, and so like for me, the frustration and passion was something. It's just being a sports guy. Uh, I've always just had that dog in me, Like when we were competing, it was just like I don't know, like it's insane. But
Right.
yeah, let's talk about um, let's talk about New York City. I have had a lot of rural people on my podcast.
Yeah.
It seems like it's a pretty common theme. So, growing up in the city, you said, and one thing I really loved what you said, and your dad was your friend. Now, being a dad right now, I'm in this part of my relationship with my son where I always want to balance that like relationship of friend and dad, where he may not, like do things I say because we're like friends or bros, but it's cool to hear you say, hey, my dad is my friend. I still respect him to this day, And so I look at that as like, oh, maybe that's where my son's going to be later on down the road, where he can be like, hey, my dad's my friend, but I still, if he comes down with a hammer, like, oh, yep.
Right. Yeah. I mean, for me, it was like, I think when you're a kid, you grow up and you get to a certain point and it's different for everyone where you realize like your parents are people too. They're not just your parents, right? This is, sometimes their first time doing this as well. And so you kind of cut them a little more slack. Like they're not perfect. Nobody is. And then you start to understand like, they're people too, right? They got emotions. They got their own things that they're dealing with. So you start to kind of appreciate that more. And, my dad and I like a lot of the same things. We're big sports fans. That's really where we connect a lot. A lot of our conversations are about sports, I would say. And honestly, some of our biggest arguments are about sports. I mean, we will go to battle about, different stuff. But yeah, I mean, we grew up, like I always lived with him for the most part. And we've had like a very, I'd say different growing up than a lot of people I know. And so like just through those times, right? Like, you just develop like a bond. He's still my dad, but he's like, he's like a friend, you know what I mean? So it's a good relationship. I'm lucky to have him. But yeah, I mean, he said, that he was the first person I called when I got the no, right? Similar to your wife. And, his first thing was like, you've been through worse, right? You've been through different hardships than this, right? You've been told no before, you've failed before. So what are you going to do? Right. And so that kind of put me in perspective, right? Like this is not the end of the world. Life goes on. You just got to learn from it. Right. And so I think like when you get older, having those conversations with the parent especially is really important. So I'm thankful for him for sure.
Yeah, and man, I don't, I didn't call my parents after. I know I just waited till I got home. And I think the one thing my dad was always stressing on me before I was going to top T was what's next. You know, like what if you don't make it? And for me, I was going to the top T like no plan B. Like this is because I had to be so mentally focused and caged where he always kept me very humbled. You know, like hey, what if something happens? What if you get hurt? What if you don't make it? What's next? And so even though I didn't have a plan B, it was still there because he was sort of helping me guide
Right.
that purpose, you know, instead of just like agreeing with me and being like, hey, you know, like you got this, you're going to get it. You know, he was always just that like that grounding cable that was just like, hey, you know, I appreciate your gung ho attitude, but you know, like I've seen, like he's seen some things, he knows how life is. What if you don't make it?
Right.
So it was nice to have that. I look back to it now, I'm like, okay. Because then when I didn't make it, you know, I was like, oh, well, I have had these conversations. I know what's next. And that was my biggest thing when the cadre and some of you guys are like, hey, man, you should go back through. But for me, you know, I had other ducks in the pond. Like I've told you guys, I've said in the podcast, like the TACPO was my shiny duck in the pond, but there were other ducks I could still use throughout my career. Like this wasn't the only thing in my career. I had other options to do. Like I'm going back to the B1 to go fly, which, you know, being away for 2 years it was cool because I got to not balance my life, but bring my family and career and leadership side up while my aviator side took a backseat. But now I'm balancing them out. I'm making them in harmony. So my career, leadership, podcast is all up here. Now it's like, okay, cool. Let's get back into the aviation side, lead from the B1, help those young generation guys with my experience. And so I just shifted my mindset of, hey, it's not TACPO, but hey, who knows? Maybe we'll be calling in strikes later on down the road together when we do some training or
Right.
wherever we are. So
Yeah.
that'd be pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. No, I mean, for me, it was like, I think he always kind of wanted me to fly just because like he grew up watching Top Gun. Like he thinks it's like the coolest thing. And then when I explained to him, like, this is what I'm passionate about, like he was very supportive, which meant a lot. He wasn't like, oh, you should fly instead, or, this seems too hard, whatever. He was just like, all right, you know what you got to do, just get it done. Like that was, that's been kind of a relationship. Like he was he was hands on and hands off at the same time. Like he was hard on me with sports, but he also like respected my independence. Like he was like, you can do what you want if you're at the right time at the right place and doing the right thing. Then I have nothing else to say, right? So like, I didn't, wasn't perfect, but I wasn't getting in trouble or I wasn't, doing the worst things. And I was a hard worker. So he was like, if you, show up with the right attitude, I got, no quarrel with you. So when I told him I wanted to do this, he was like, all right, I don't know much about this, but you know what you got to do. So just go out and do it. That's kind of his attitude. And that's kind of the attitude that I've adopted. Like, there's no excuses. You just got to go and do it. And if you don't do it, then at least you can say you tried your best. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Yeah, I feel like we had pretty similar growing ups like that. My dad was sort of the same way. He never like enforced what sports I was going to play or when I play. As long as I tried at the sport I wanted to do, or I kept working, he was just like, you know, go do it, you know. And that's sort of like my whole high school career going through football and all these sports I
Right.
played. Now, there was a question I had for you, and you sort of already alluded into it. What does your family know about the TACPO job? You know, how was that conversation? Obviously, you're in the academy. And my perception, and a lot of people listening, the academy we may think is just flyers, right? Like,
Right.
hey, you go to the academy, you go fly. So, how has that conversation been when you got to the academy, when you're making your way through?
Yeah. So for me, like, I kind of wanted to do something in this realm since I was a little kid. And, it was always like the first thing you hear about, especially now with all the media attention it gets, is like, oh, I want to be a SEAL, right? And then you're like, okay, there's other things to do. And then I was fortunate enough to get recruited to the Air Force Academy. And so, my mindset was like, I have the ability to, use the sport I'm playing to get into a college that I would not be able to get into without it, right? And then when I got here, it was more of like, okay, let me learn about these career fields. Like, what do they do? Right. And so over time, like over the first few years, I was just trying to learn what they do, pick one, and then focus on that. And then so like explaining it to them, I usually have them, like I tell them the name and then just like look it up because, again, I haven't done the job. I've only talked to a few guys that have done it. So it's more so the way I describe it is you're in the Air Force, but you are on the ground using the Air Force's capabilities to help out the guys on the ground. And, and that can come through so many different capabilities that you have. But, I think he's starting to understand it. He thinks it's really cool. He's a little nervous, obviously, but I'm trying to explain to him it's, every job is a safe job until it's not, right? So, but yeah, I mean, explaining it to like my friends and stuff like that, they're all supportive and whatnot. So I think everyone was surprised. Oh, you don't want to fly? And I'm like, maybe not. No, I don't know. But, and then when I figured this out, I was like, okay, this is what I want to do. So, yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned a little bit what brought you to the academy. You said you had the sports there to help you. Was the academy always in your career? Or do you have military family? When you heard about it, how was it, or was it just the sports that got you there?
Yeah. So, not any immediate family military. Some extent, like some uncles and great uncles and grandfathers, like a lot of people, World War II, Vietnam, that era. But for me, it was like I always wanted to do something active after college, right? Like I am an active person. I don't like sitting around. My dad worked on Wall Street, and I'm really close to my uncle. He does the same, and that it's really cool. It's very lucrative career, but for me, it was like I want to be doing something where I'm like with a team. That was a big thing. I grew up playing team sports, so being with a team is huge. And then just doing something where I'm like moving my body. And so, getting recruited, I was getting recruited to a few schools. I don't really come from money. So, especially the no tuition is definitely a factor, but it wasn't like the main thing. So it was kind of just a combination of all those. And then I was fortunate enough to get seen at like a tournament in summertime by the coach at the academy. And I went out on a visit there, and typically you don't really verbally commit on your first visit. I did because I was just like giddy. And we're in the drive back. It was kind of funny. It was like a 2-day trip. We flew in the next day. I toured and I committed, and then we flew out, and then we're in the car, and I'm like all fired up because it's like a big thing for like kids my age when you commit and whatnot. It's like, bragging rights and all that whatnot. And I'm like, aren't you excited? And he's like, yeah, but you just made the decision of your life for the next 10 years minimum. I was like, oh crap, you're right. But I really had no second thoughts about it. It was kind of what I wanted to do. So yeah, it was really always on my radar since I was like pretty little, and then it just, came into fruition, which was great. But yeah.
So that's cool. Yeah, it's always good to. And I've seen a huge shift in the academy where, maybe it's like 10 years ago, it was very pilot flying heavy, and it's shifted to where like we had some cadets come to Dias for their ops tour in June, and I think out of the 12 we had, only like 2 wanted to be flyers,
Yeah.
and the rest were just like there was some special warfare guys, there was some intel, and I was like, man, it's cool to see the shift into not just like the academy is flying, right? It's more just now a service branch, going in.
Right.
But it's not relying so much on making a bunch of flyers. There, it seems like it's really opening up to a lot of jobs in the military.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think that's what people are starting to realize. Like, you can do so many things in the Air Force, which is really cool. I will say that like a lot of people will just, they'll use their experience at the academy with the degree, and then they'll go and do acquisitions or intel, and then they'll do something in the civilian world. Like, and that's totally fair. Use what you have gained to advantage your life. Right. But for me, it was like, I'm probably going to make a career out of it just because I love it so far. Specifically the team aspect of it is probably the driving thing. But yeah, it is cool to see like, out of my friends, like only a few of them are going to fly probably, and the rest are going to go on to do some different things, which I think is really neat. And now that we have the Space Force too, like that's a different commissioning source, similar to like how Annapolis has the Navy and the Marine Corps. Obviously the Space Force is different than the Marines, but you get my point. But yeah, it's gotten pretty cool. So people can
go to the academy, go either route.
Yeah. So you can apply to be in the Space Force. I don't know what that training pipeline looks like. I think now it's like you go to like everyone goes to the same tech school and then you like test into a specific career field in the Space Force. But yeah, so I would say like a good amount of people are trying to go Space Force now just because the work-life balance is definitely more manageable, I would say, than like the Air Force or another branch. As of now, I don't know what it's going to look like in the future because it's such a it's such a small branch as of now, but it's definitely a cool option for people that want to do that.
Yeah, I didn't even know. Yeah, it makes sense, right? To
Yeah,
instead of the Space Force creating their own university to get people, just send them to
right,
a university that's already out there for military recruitment and
right,
just pick the ones you want.
right, right.
All right, let's dive into this. So, the next part we'll talk about is my leadership philosophy. So, I got this philosophy going through a course every major will go through in the Air Force, which is called ACSC. It's like a master's for career progression that we have available to us. And one of the classes, a leadership class, which I really enjoyed because that was me in the middle of becoming a better leader and understanding this process. So I had to come up with a philosophy like if I were to lead people, how would I show them I lead? And I look to these four traits as, maybe you saw some when we were in the top T selection. But I assume when people hear me say them, they go, yep, 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 checks. That's, what he does. It's lead by example in all you do. To be selfless, you have to be selfish. Build relationships based off trust and care. And then challenge the road in front of you, getting comfortable, being uncomfortable. So that's how I sort of go into every day. And I had a discussion with someone about this on a phone call, actually. I met him through TikTok. He's in San Antonio. He's an Army guy. And he just wanted to talk about like career stuff. And I told him, I was like, hey, your habits dictate your routines and all that. And one of the ways I structure my day and my vision and my goals is off my four leadership traits. If anything I do should relate to those four things. So like if I'm going to read a new book or pursue a new passion like podcasting or, working on my nutrition and fitness while becoming a flyer, everything I do should follow those four traits. And that's just how I live my life. It's just when I wake up and I do something, I go, am I leading by these four things? So out of those four, which one do you find you relate to? And then which one have you seen? Oh, I could work on that one. What do I need to do? And how can I get better at it?
Yeah, I mean, I think leading by example is one that is pretty apparent to me. I think I don't want to say it's the most important, but I think if you lack that one, it's really hard to be a good leader. Because like, I think you learn how to be a leader from bad leaders, I would say. And I haven't had many bad leaders, to be honest, but the ones that I have had experience with, like, they'll tell you to do something, but they won't do it or can't do it themselves. And I think that is like very important, right? I think you talked about it with Will, but like, if you're going to tell a guy to get 100 on his PT tests, but you're not getting 100, like, how is he going to listen to you, right? So that aspect, I think at top T, it was important too. Like, if you're the team lead or you're trying to make a point, but you're not doing that or you're really struggling, like, it's kind of hard for people to listen to you and get behind you with that. Um, for sure. And then I think the one that I struggle with is probably like, to be selfless, you have to be selfish. And not more so in the fact that I'm like not selfish in some aspects. I think that I can understand that in the wrong way. For me, a lot of my problem the first time, I think I was very like internally driven. I was like, I'm here, I want to win everything. Um, I'm going to compete, and then that will be enough, right? And then not understanding that you can do those things, but you can still use that to help your team. Um, so that was, one of the pieces of feedback that I received. It was like, yeah, it's great if you can do well and take care of yourself, but what are you doing to take care of other people, right? So like you can have the selfish part down, but if you just have that part down, you can't be selfless, right? And so understanding that. So that's something I'm still trying to work on. I think it went better the second time, but something I'm trying to think of like kind of day to day at school and just like in the things that I do.
I like that concept of it where you want to be selfless, but you still want to be able to use that to your advantage, and that's a good nugget right there. And I'll have to go back and re-listen to that one again after, because the way you said it was cool. And it is a tough one for people to grasp. It's
Yeah.
either some people think it's like 100 or none on that like selfless level.
Right.
You're either all in on yourself and that's it, or you're the complete opposite where you're just the guy that's helping everybody. We're trying to do everything for everybody else, but you're not helping yourself. And
Right.
so that balance is a very hard one. And that is still one of the four that I think I always see people like sort of like cringe, or they're like, oh, that's a tough one.
Right.
But I throw it in there and I say it all the time. And I think I said it on Will's. The reason I have it is because it's so important and it's so direct, because it does mean a lot to tell. And it ties right into lead by example. If I'm going to have somebody bust their butt on this event, I should be able to do it myself and then take care of myself as well. So
Right.
it's a hard one because it's definitely tough. And I like what you said about you can still do it, but then you have to be able, when you're doing it, to see what everybody else is doing.
Right. Because
So I'm glad that was some of the feedback you got. And then what you did, right, is you applied it. Like, that's huge. And that's what I loved about the Top T selection is it wasn't a course where if you failed it, you were like done.
right.
Like, a lot of courses are where you sort of like fail or you get kicked out or you don't finish. And they're like, well, like, that's it. This course was very open to, hey, you didn't make it. Here's your feedback. We want you to come back in because that shows you're learning, like, and that's what. And so to see you guys go back through and make that effort and change and I think that's a test for them. Like, they use that as a test to be like, hey, if he
Right.
comes back and just does the things he's got.
Right. Yeah, for sure. I think that one is hard for people to grasp because the word selfish is such it's kind of like a scary word to hear because it's the last thing you want to hear, right? But at the same time, like you had mentioned, like if you're not taking care of yourself, you can't take care of other people. But also if you're only taking care of yourself and you just expect that to take care of other people, it's not going to happen either. So it's like, it's finding that healthy balance. That's really important that I struggled with at first. Because, a lot of my problem was like the mentality of going in. For me, I approached it like a recruiting showcase for like lacrosse or something like that. Right. Where, I need to make myself look better than everybody and I need to make everybody look worse than me. Right. And that is such a toxic mentality to have. Like in some aspects, it's good. You have to be competitive. You have to have drive. You can't just be happy-go-lucky all the time and not really care. But at the same time, like it is a team-based, environment where it's like you're being assessed as an officer, how well you can take care of a team. It's not just if you can do the job well, right? And so that was hard to hear coming from like a sports background of like being a team guy. So I thought that you weren't a team guy, right? Like that was tough to hear for sure. But then when I kind of look back on it, I was like, okay, that totally makes sense. How can I like shift that mentality? So I'm glad I got that feedback because I didn't really know that until I was told.
Yeah, I think that's what you brought up with Jeter earlier was he was never like, he's still athletic, but he wasn't like a Barry Bonds, right? Where he just looked jacked or he
Right.
was hitting home runs, or Michael Jordan or Kobe Bryant. You brought up a great word, was consistent. A lot of the greats in sports are very consistent.
100%.
There's not many greats that we may idolize that played for maybe 2 or 3 years. There's a couple, right? Like I think of like football, like Megatron. He had a couple flashy years. He made it into Hall of Fame, which some people can be like, well, he didn't really do a lot, but there's that flashiness. But then consistent is really what separates greatness from just good athletes. And
Yeah.
when you brought up Derek Jeter, I grew up watching him as well too. My wife's a Yankees fan, unfortunately. She's also a Giants fan. But I tell a lot of people, we only met during one of the Super Bowls where they beat the Patriots. If it would have been during both of them, we probably wouldn't be together. But we're both on the tail end of football right now. We sort of just watch it for fun. We don't really watch our teams anymore. But we're hoping to bounce back.
Yeah.
But that's what I loved about Jeter is he was never really flashy. He had the players on his team that were really good too. And so he was just very consistent. And, captain is a great term. Captain is a cool term because it's not like the best. People know when they hear the word captain, it's like, oh, you got a little bit of everything.
Right.
You can lead in the dugout. You can lead on the field. You can step up when you need to. And there's a book out there that it's the author is Tim Grover. He's a professional athletes like trainer for like Kobe Bryant, Dwayne Wade, and Michael Jordan. He talks about there's cleaners, closers, and something else in sports. And the cleaners is sort of like the captains. They they'll just do the work all the time. They're always working. The closers are the people who come in when they need it, and then they sort of jump in and finish the game. But to have that consistency as a captain is a good term. Yeah, when you threw out like captain, there are all these words where I was like, ooh, nice. Like that's what we like to hear, and that's what we like to see.
I think consistency is important. Yeah,
it is.
it's pivotal.
It's huge. Yeah, and it's tough because in the military in general, we're not. It's hard to show consistency because we're sometimes put in situations where we need quick decisions, or you only have a short time to get to know somebody. So it's hard to show consistency,
Right?
Especially when you're switching every 2 years, when you go from base to base or job to job. 2 years really is the start of consistency. Like I've only been on my journey for 3 years per se. My journey is, losing all my weight, becoming a better person, and I feel like I'm just getting started. And I'm 37 years old, and I only look at those past 3 years, and I'm like, dang, if I would have been doing this for 15, 20 years, it's insane. But yeah, so there's that. One question I'll ask you since you brought it up, and I had it written down too, which is fun. What are some stories of those good leaders? I want to hear the good leader stories. So what do you got in your mind that you've seen? What did you see from them? What did you take? Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'll say the second time I was at Top T, there was a master sergeant who was a TACP for a long time, and now he's in the Guard, and now he's going to go to OTS and whatnot. And he was a really funny guy. He was around your age as well, and he was just like, he had that perfect balance of like, this is when it's time to get done, and then this is when it's time to like have some fun. You know what I mean? And I think that's really important because if you just go the whole time, your guys are going to get destroyed, right? And whereas at the same note, like if you are only like having fun, happy go lucky, you're not really going to get a lot done. And so I think he showed a really good balance of that. And then also he did a really good job. He was the most experienced guy in the room. He was a stud athlete. Like he was just an all around beast, but he was also extremely genuine, right? Like he was asking everybody questions. Like he had all this experience, but he wanted to hear about myself and the ROTC guys, right? Like just asking those questions, like getting to know people. When I'm like, dude, you're like a hero. Like you're like a legend in this community. Like I have nothing. We don't even touch the stratosphere that you have, but he wants to hear about us. Like that, I think that shows a lot. So that was definitely one of them. I'm trying to think of another example. Yeah, I'll say a kid that I played lacrosse with at the academy. He graduated 2 years ago now, so he was there my freshman sophomore year, and he was like the embodiment of consistency. Like he was like always in shape, always had the right attitude, showed up on time with a good like everything he needed to check was solid. Like he wasn't the best player. He was very good. I'm not gonna say he wasn't, but he was just like every single day you knew what you expected out of him and he delivered, right? And so that like consistency day in day out, especially as like a freshman looking up to like some of the older guys, you're like, okay, like I want to be like that no matter what, if it's in lacrosse or like in your career or anything you do. Just someone you can really rely on. I think reliability is a big thing in a leader, because if you lack consistency and you lack that reliability, it's like it's kind of shaky. Whereas I'd rather have a guy who might not be as talented or as a freak of an athlete, but if he does the right thing day in, day out, like I'd rather have that guy on my team. So I'd say those two from like a recent experience would be the, examples of good leaders for sure.
Man, I highlighted a bunch of words there. And it sort of ties into my third one, relationships based off trust and care. You talk about genuine empathy and relationships. And what I loved about your story about that guy during Top T is he was able to do that in like a condensed timeline, right? So that's what's hard to do sometimes, as well as a lot of people think relationships take a long time, but they don't. Like you saw it, we built relationships in 5 days. Like
right.
I've built long-term relationships with you guys in 5 days.
Right,
like,
for
that's
sure.
Crazy. So I think one thing people should consider is building relationships doesn't take a long time. You can still do it in a condensed timeline if you have to, but you also have to continue the relationships too.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's one thing I've seen a lot of commanders lack is they'll come into a squadron, they'll get to know everybody like right away. And then after they settle into their job, they don't come back and see how you're doing. They don't check up on you. And so I've seen that hit or miss with some of the commanders I've had in my past where they'll go out, they get to the squadron, their first few months, they're out and about at their shops, get to know airmen. And then they sort of back up because they check the box on, right? Like, hey, I know Ben, he's from New York. Cool. I built that relationship and they think that's it.
Right.
So there's a fine balance between that. Empathy is hard. But I think empathy comes with experience. Usually people that have a lot of experience and a little bit older, they understand empathy and how to relate to people out there. And so I was glad when, you're talking about, hey, this guy was able to empathize with me, even though I'm just a cadet, or ROTC. There's connections we all have together there. And then being genuine and intentful in your purpose is huge. I've seen a lot of, not just Air Force leaders, but people, try to get to know you, but you can tell they're not trying to get to know you. And it's an easy thing to notice.
Right.
When people are faking this empathy. And yeah, so that's a huge thing. Those three right there, genuine empathy, relationship, you tie those together, you put them in a bow, that's great. The other one I want to dive into is reliability. That's tough. But man, I wrote down, what is that, and how do you build reliability? Man,
I think it's tough.
Yeah.
I think it's because just because you're the best at something doesn't mean you're reliable, right? But being proficient at something and then having that ability to share with other people, that proficiency is really important too. And then I also think it's just doing the little things. In sports, you always talk about the little things. And in the military, it's the little things get people killed, right? Taking care of those little things is really important. So at Top T, for example, topping off the waters and filling the jerrys and, those small things that lead to success allow us to not get destroyed later in the week, right? But also just in life, the little things I don't know, making your bed in the morning or, small things like that, you know what I mean? And then from the sports perspective, because that kid was so reliable, was just always was on time, respectful to the coaches, took care of the teammates, just someone that if you were in a situation or you needed someone to go to, he's one of the first calls just because he has built that reliability from his actions. You know what I mean? And so it's I think it's kind of personal how you define reliable, but I think when it's there, you got it, right? If someone's reliable, there's no way to define it. I would say, I think it kind of just happens. It's one of those things. It's just yeah, that guy's a reliable dude. I would rely on that guy. I trust that guy. But I think that comes from over time of just, learning, being a good guy and doing the right thing, I would say.
Yeah, one of the lines that stuck out to me was, you know what to expect, and he delivered. That's a good way to look if somebody's reliable. If you can sit back and be like, if I don't show up today, is Johnny going to show up? Yeah, he's going to show up. He's
Right.
not waiting on somebody to tell him when to go to practice or when to do BP or, sorry, baseball terms, but I don't know what you guys call BP in lacrosse, if it's throwing or I don't know.
Same concept, basically. Yeah.
So that was a good line to remember. I should be able to look around the room at my team or my people I'm working with and go, if I don't show up today, is Johnny going to show up? Nope. Okay. He's not that quick decision for reliability. And then how do I help him build that? A line I hear all the time and on another podcast I listen to, which is Teach Me to Fish, is the Army's a bit huge at this. And that's why I love the TACPO community, because they're so engraved in the Army. And I love the Army's warrior and ethos and leadership mindset is be great at the basics. Yeah. Dude, if there is any tip I can give any young leader is be great at the basics. I have a lot of lieutenants that always ask me, hey, Manny, what do I got to work on when I get to my first shop or start leading all these people? Dude, just be good at the basics. Show up on time. Be professional. Respond to your emails quickly. Go to PT. Control what you control. If you don't know how to lead, but you do those, you're going to be a good leader. Because 99% of most people don't do that. And that already is going to stand you out amongst your peers. Be great at the basics. Obviously, as a flyer, that's what we hit home on, I should be able to start the jet, in, as fast as I can with my eyes closed, in one hand. I should know where the switches are to drop a bomb. Be great at the basics, because in stressful times, I don't have time to go, what's my checklist say for where's my auto unlock switch? Oh, shoot, I don't know where it's at. It should be like, boom, boom. Hey, guys, we're good. That is it. That's one of the tips if I were to give any new person listening and you don't know where to start, be great at the basics. And it's simple. Wake up on time. Don't hit snooze.
Yeah.
Work out, like shower, things like that. And a lot of people don't think those are leadership traits, but they are. A lot of people think they just don't think they are. And so when I tell people they are and they go, oh, I can do that, it sort of helps them build that confidence in becoming a better leader. And so that's why doing the little things matter. I wasn't huge on making my bed 3 years ago before this like transformation, because I was very much like, hey, I'm just gonna go to sleep in it tonight. But I'm teaching my kids to make their bed. I do it every morning now. My wife now does it as she gets up and I'm already gone. So we built that like transformation, and it's it makes sense. You want to stack wins in your favor every day. If I can go to work, let's say at 8:30, and I've already stacked 5 wins in my favor, I've won for the day. If I've worked out, I've made my bed, I've brushed my teeth, I weighed myself, I drank 20 ounces of water. That's 5 wins before I go to work. Like, I won.
Right.
Let's
Yeah.
say work sucked. Who cares? Like, it sucked, but I still controlled what I controlled in the morning. I won the day, and now I can continue there. So is that some of the stuff they teach at the academy? What are some of those easy wins they sort of build in you there?
I mean, they expect you to make your bed and like your room to be in like a certain standard. It's different from like your freshman year to after that, but hair and regs, facial hair, whatnot, uniform looks good and stuff like that. But honestly, that should be kind of stuff that you do on your own, in my opinion. Everyone comes from like a different background, so I understand. But for me, it's like, did I work out today? Did I do my homework, right? Like that's a big thing. Um, did I do the small things that I should be doing every day? Because for me, like if I don't, I feel guilty, right? Like if I miss a workout, like I feel like crap. Um, so I would say they do a fairly decent job of ingraining that in you, but I also think it comes a lot from your peers, like who you surround yourself with. If you surround yourself with like hardworking, good people, you're inherently going to pick those things up, right? Like I've learned a lot from people younger than me and like my age on like how to act, right? Or like the right thing to do. Just because I notice they're super squared away and these are some of the things that they do. So I'm going to start doing those. Right. And I have done that for somebody else. Right. And you don't know it. They don't know it that they've helped me in that way, but you just kind of pick up on things like, hey, this guy's got it. What is he kind of doing in his day to day that I can pick up as well? So it's just kind of who you surround yourself. That's, I think, the most important thing about the academy. Like what I've gotten most out of it is like the relationships that have come from it. I've made some of my best friends for life and also just like learned a lot from my friends. And then obviously there's a lot of older mentors who, have, instructed me along the way and whatnot, but it's different when it comes from someone that you're doing the same things as, I would say.
Yeah, I'm going to throw in a plug for Atomic Habits here if you haven't read it. It's a great book because you just mentioned one of the pages I have tabbed on it. Our habits are built by the 3 people we surround ourselves with: the few, the powerful, and the many, or the close, the many, and the powerful. And what does that mean? That means, and I use this perspective, the many is like my family, right? Or, hey, that's who I build habits from. The close is like people I work with. So who am I around day to day? And the powerful are the people who I follow, I watch, I check in on. Like, and you mentioned it, man. If you surround yourself with great people, you're going to build great habits.
Right.
Habits build into routine. Routine builds into wins. Wins stack up, and it's literally just domino effect. So a lot of people will wonder, like, how do I find these powerful or successful people? Like, what if I don't have in my workplace? Like, some workplaces don't have a lot of those people. So for me, like, social media is my powerful habits. I am intentful on who I follow on social media, who I tag on my reels, who I do this, because they are challenging me. We move to the level of those around us. If I'm following or around people that are lazy, complaining all the time, not doing the work, that's who I'm going to be, regardless if I'm a high achiever. They're just going to sink to their level. And so for some people, it's either going to make or break them. They're either not going to step up to it because they're nervous, or they're only going to surround themselves with people who are lower than them so they continue to be better. But what they don't realize when they do that, the people below them, they're catching up to them because those people below them are using that person to like catch up to, right? Like that's their powerful. And so it's like this teeter-totter game or leapfrog game. If I'm surrounding myself with people that are worse than me, they're going to outperform me because they're catching up to me. And so that's what I like about social media is I literally get to follow the most successful people in the world.
Right.
Like my feed is with like Andy, Frisella from First Form, or Joe Rogan or David Goggins, or these people where some people are like, dude, how do you watch their videos every day and like not get demotivated? I'm like, bro, I'm demotivated, but I'm also motivated because I know they started too.
Right.
Like David Goggins talks about in his book, he started as well. Joe Rogan didn't just jump in to be one of the best podcasters or, with these guys. He's went through a lot in his life, and he's bounced back from it. And so you have to understand it's going to take time, but and that's why those habits come from those people. And that's where a lot of my traits came from. It didn't come from the military. It came from First Form because they have on their walls of their headquarters these core values, build relationships, all these things. When you walk into their place and you're like, dang, like if I see this every day, that's who I'm going to become. And so that's how I tied into the military. It's a lot of people think I got my traits from the military. I didn't. The military hasn't taught me much on leadership. Honestly, it's been a steep learning curve, but hopefully it changes in the future, as people start to develop and understand leadership isn't just something you just get from doing a job. You have to build it, you have to cultivate it, and you have to learn it. And so, I was glad you brought that up for, hey, it's who we surround ourselves with. So that was a great discussion point there. So let's dive into a couple more traits. Which ones did you write down or have questions on from my list?
I thought, the find your passion one is really important. And I kind of wanted to hear your perspective on it too. For me, it's like, if you aren't like looking towards something, it's really hard to stay consistent about it. For me, it was like, I spent the last, give or take a year focusing on top T, right? And then, I didn't get selected. And then I was like, okay, I got to go back in 2 months, I got to recover and then I got to keep going, right? And so now it's like, okay, it's a long haul, but then the schoolhouse, right? And then what's after that, getting ready for deployment and whatnot. So I try and like stay passionate about those long-term things so you stay motivated. But sometimes it's hard, right? Like you have a small win and you're like, all right, I can take a break. So I was wondering, like, now for you, like in your career, right? Like you're older and you just became a major. Congrats on that, by the way. And so, like, what is your passion now? Like, what are you passionate about?
I've learned, man, I feel like you have to go all in. And when I say all in, like you have to have a lot of passions. I think it's hard to rely on one passion to get you through everything because, like you said, if that's the only driving thing you have, when you get there, it's like, what next? For me, the passion, and I think it comes into the balance of my life, right? If I look at my career development, my job, my family, my religion, my fitness, all of those can have their own passion that keep me going forward. So I can like pick and choose throughout my year, let's say, where my passion is focused to keep me going forward overall. So like, for instance, Top T, like that's where my passion was. That's where my drive was. That's where my focus was for about a year it was April 23 when I figured out I wanted to do this. So it was almost a full year. When I didn't get selected, where was my passion? So I was able to be like, well, that passion's gone per se. What other passions are out there? Well, my podcast, my nutrition, my family. Let's pick those up a little bit and even out those playing cards to where that's my focus and my passion. But I need to know those are still leading to my final goal, which is 20 years retirement, a great family, moving on for First Form, but they all have like a bigger purpose. So that's why I love a vision board is a great way to maintain passion. So I have like my vision board in my garage, it's on my laptop, it's on my work laptop. That drives the passions because it's keeping me balanced and almost on a different path whenever I need to. Overall, I think they should be hard and challenging. I just talked about this with that other guy. A passion shouldn't be something easy that's easily achievable, because when you get there, is it worth it? What's next? Like, it should be hard. It should be like you wake up every day and you're nervous about your passion. Like, I'm nervous every day of doing my workouts because I feel like I'm doing harder and harder dang workouts every day, but that's what keeps me going. Or is my job challenging me day to day? You know, when I took a break from flying wasn't challenging me every day. And so that wasn't my passion at the time. So I had to shift gears and find something else. And that's when I became selfish and my passion was me. I lost a bunch of weight. I dove into endurance training and pushing my body physically and mentally. And then my passion shifted to including my kids, you know, including my family, becoming a better father. Now I've shifted it back towards flying, right? Because now I'm in this weird spot where I didn't want to go back to flying because I was behind the curve. I'm not in the same spot as other majors. You know, I'm not an instructor. I'm not progressing along that career. So I was nervous to get back into flying because I was behind. But I've shifted my mindset and known this is my passion now. So this is my challenge, right? How do I go back to an op squadron as a major with, 18 years in the military and be at the same, level as these young lieutenants? Mentally, it's tough, where I'm in a jet with another lieutenant or captain that knows more than me or is more proficient. So that's my passion there. And so passion should also be challenging and learning. It shouldn't be something you're good at per se. You should be getting better at. So that's what I think of for passion. Passion is what drives you, and it's hard. I think that has to come down to the main thing. And that's why leading by example is so crucial into hard passions. Like, to do hard things is going to make you passionate about it, right? Like, getting through top T is freaking hard. And so that's why it's so much passion when you do it. And there's so much emotion. And
Right.
I talked about it on Will. What I loved about top T is when we didn't get selected, we weren't like separated after that night, like we literally were still like, and that's what made it almost easier for me, was we were still talking to each other. We took our picture, we hung out, even though, we could have just like went into the other room and those that didn't make it were in there that night, but we didn't. And that was because those 5 days of freaking the hardest thing I've ever done in my life.
Right.
Like, I don't know if it was
Yeah.
like that the second time you went through, for the people who didn't make it, if you had that
Yeah, I mean,
bond.
it was similar. It was different because it was a smaller group, right? We finished with
Yeah, because that's true. Our class was 2 combined. You guys had
right,
that
right.
smaller,
So we
yeah.
finished with 9, I want to say.
Oh, dang.
Yeah, we finished with 9, and so when we got the news of the selection choices, like I knew in my mind like what I would want to hear because I've been there, right? So I was trying to kind of be that for some of the people that were pretty upset. Um, it was a different dynamic for sure of the group. One, because of the size, and two, because just different personalities, right? But it was similar. We all just kind of hung out. You just went through like this extremely challenging thing. And so it's like you build those bonds, even though I've known those people for 4.5, 5 days, right? Similar to our experience. Like I remember, Will had talked about it, but when he talked about that person that he took outside, like that was me, right? And so I remember that, and I was like, I've been there, so like, what can I do to help some other people in that situation that I was in? Because I remember like when we got the news, like I tried to be kind of like stoic about it and all cool and whatnot, and it's like you just got the worst news ever. And so he took me outside and shared that in-doc story and was like just like a really good shoulder. And I will forever be thankful for that. And so, the second time when I was talking to some of the people that got the same news that I did the first time, I was just trying to be like, been there. I know it sucks, but you got to learn from it. Like this, like, I don't know about your experience, but for me, like that was the best feedback I've received basically my whole life, right? Like it's very in-depth, very personalized. Because I think every cadre member had different perspectives, but um, you know, that was definitely like that was nice being able to like just hang out with everybody, and it wasn't like secluded at all. I think everyone fell asleep pretty fast because we were all exhausted. But yeah, I mean, it was a cool experience, man. It was fun. It was fun.
That's cool. Yeah. Yeah, it got me thinking of, so for people listening here trying to figure out how do I, replicate that relationship, that bonding over not a top T experience, right? I tell a lot of people, if you want to have these relationships or build these bonds with new people you work with or in a new shop, go do hard things together. There's another phrase out there that I've heard on podcasts is build relationships through comfort over crisis. And the Army uses this in their training, right? They train very hard together to make real world situations not as extreme or it's because so the way they use it is if someone were to commit suicide and I didn't know who they were and someone comes to me and goes, "Hey, Johnny committed suicide," and I'm just now learning who Johnny is, where he lives, who his family is. In a moment of crisis, I've failed. I should be building a relationship during comfort. Comfort is PT, work, training environments, exercises. That is where we can build those relationships. So if you make them hard and challenging, like trauma bonding, I think is a real thing. It is,
Definitely.
it's a term used for getting to build relationships over a trauma event. Like I'm not calling top T trauma, but it was hard, and that's where you build those relationships. Is memorable moments in time that are stressful. And so I do a lot of rucks with airmen here, and for them that is very hard. And so we build relationships during those hard events to get to know each other. So that later on in life or throughout their day, if they need something, they know they can come to me even though I don't work for them or I'm a major and they're an A1C or whatever, but they know like, hey, I've rucked with Manny. He's been there. He can do this. And so that's one tip I always give people is like, hey, if you don't know how to build relationships, go work out together. It's the easiest way. But you have to do it hard, honestly. You can't just go to the gym and go for it. You can go for, well, I love walking. Walking is a great workout, but you can't expect it to build over time if you take it easy. So.
No, I agree. I think like the best friends that I have, I've done difficult things with or been through difficult things with. Um, just because you like understand that this person went through that same thing that I thought was the hardest thing ever, right? So you're not alone, right? You're not alone in the suffering, I guess. Um, that's why I think it was so easy to all like talk to each other after, some of us did and didn't get selected because we all were like, we got through the week,
Yeah.
we all survived, right? Um, even though at times I felt like I wasn't going to survive because it was, crappy. But yeah, I mean, I kind of want to ask, like, what was your, like experience, like going in, during, and then kind of after, being a more experienced guy? Like, what was kind of take me through that because I'm interested to hear that.
Yeah, so in April of 23, when I had this opportunity to try to cross train, I was getting ready to deploy. I had this window of opportunity to find another job, and the TACPO opportunity came about. I was obviously in great shape, so I knew the physical wasn't going to be a problem. So I started reaching out to a lot of TACPOs I knew, talking to them all the time, like, "Hey, I'm looking to do this. What should I expect?" And all the feedback I got was great. Like, "Hey, you're a flyer. You're a seer guy. You're going to fit great. Just do what you got to do. Keep doing this. Your biggest thing is obviously going to be how to become a servant leader in a time where young leaders are trying to show themselves during top T." I was like, okay, cool. So like lead from the rear, do what I can, do that. So closer to top T, you live by the gouge and die by the gouge. You've ever heard that expression? So I sort of took the gouge as when I'm going to top T, they knew who I was. And so I was going into it as not showing my leadership skills, but just making it through because my biggest weakness, I think, from their side was can I handle physically being older and being in the military longer? So I knew I had to bring the physical side to it. I wasn't worried about my leadership or building that stuff because I thought I was going to be judged on can I servant leader as you guys were tested on your leadership. So
Mm.
going into top T, the first few days I sort of sat back. I didn't jump out a lot of leadership roles. I was controlling what I control, which was build relationships outside of the events, right? Like when we were getting to know each other, teaching when I could, and really crushing the lead of the physical stuff because I thought that was where they wanted to see me excel because that would have been my biggest weakness as an older person. So I was like, I just got to freaking crush the IFT. I crushed the pull-ups. I crushed when we did anything physically. I put my heart into it. Then the week started going on, and I was like, man, I think I need to either do some leadership stuff or show. Then I had my chances here and there. I was like, cool, I did that. I did it during this time, and I did that. But then some of my weaknesses started showing, and I was getting feedback on it. And I was like, okay, maybe that's expected. So for me, honestly, I don't know. I thought I had it in the bag, man. Like, and that's what's so hard every time I think about it because my feedback was, dude, you got good peer reviews. You did the physical stuff. And I was like, cool. Because, when we got there, the cadre was like, if you check these boxes on, physically, build relationships, do this, do that, like you'll make it. And I was going through mentally, like I'm checking the boxes, like I'm doing it. There wasn't an area where I was like, okay. So like when I got it, like I was crushed. Like when they said what they said, I didn't hear it because I had one word in mind, like you got selected. And so when I stepped out that door, I wasn't even listening to the damn psych doc, dude. I was so just like, I don't care what you tell me. Like I'm devastated. So
Yeah.
It's freaking sucked, man. Like,
Yeah, I
but
was kind of the same way. I was like, I've got it in the bag. Good. And then hearing you don't, you're like, I might be the worst. Like, this is awful, right? And so, yeah. So the second time, I was like, got through the week, and we had that waiting period. We had our phones, and we hadn't found out yet. And everyone's like, "Oh, how'd it go? What do you think?" And I'm like, "I'm not saying anything until I find out. I don't think
yeah,
I did well. I don't think I did poorly. I'm just gonna wait. I got no expectations, nothing." And so, because I was the same way, I had high hopes, and I like rushed. You know what I mean? Like it was tough. Like I mean, in my eyes, I thought you were good, because I think that your best aspect was one, showing up in shape at your age and your experience showed a lot. That's not easy. But like when we would be up just by ourselves, like not doing an event or whatnot, like that feedback session that you started and like stuff like that, that's when I think that you really excelled. So yeah, I mean, it's just I really want to know what goes into their criteria. Um, I really don't know, to be honest, because they kind of tell you, but they also don't. You know what I mean?
yeah. And I know there's a numbers game too. Like I look at our class, we had 8 selected, 4 enlisted, 4 young guys. So like their numbers wise, they probably met their quota per se. They're probably like could have I and like my feedback was I was the longest discussed guy on if I should make it or not. Like they had the toughest time figuring on if I was going to pass or not. One of the biggest feedback I got was my return of investment, which I knew going into it. I knew, so did my leadership. You only had like 3 or 4 years to give to that community. In their mind, they're looking at he goes to the schoolhouse, that's 2 years. He has 3 years till he can retire. What if he retires at 20 and only gives us 3 years of, like that, like that side. So I think that played pretty heavily. Then there was the basic feedback stuff, right? Like, hey, I didn't do great under some stressful situations, my frustration. So when they it was just whatever. And obviously when they're telling me, hey, come back, fix your things, do what you gotta do, I was like, okay, good to know. And my biggest thing was making it through the week, and I did, right? Like just like for you, like our goal isn't really to get selected through top teams, just to make it through the week. And so
Yeah.
that was huge for me. But I still look at those leadership traits to this day that they gave me feedback on, showing my frustration, which was a big one. Can I get better in stressful situations? Yes, we all can. There was feedback on the way I looked, which is fine. That's just who I am. But some of them didn't like it. And whatever. It sucks.
Can't
But
control that,
I
Yeah.
it happened for a reason, and that's the way I look at it is, God has his purpose and he knows where my journey is. And, yeah, so it was tough.
I hear you, man. I hear you.
But let's land this boat. What book do you have for those out there who are looking to find something to read to make themselves better?
Yeah, I'm sure that this is a common like leadership book, but The Mission, The Men and Me, by Peter
Pete Bladder.
Blaber. Yeah, Pete Bladder. Um, I think it's just like it should be like a must read for everyone, like not in the military, just like if you're in charge of somebody. I think it just like it does a good job of like balancing stories and advice too. It's like sometimes some leadership books are like just like a leadership manual and with no like stories, right? And you're like, okay, this is like I'm reading Marcus Aurelius at this point. With this one, I think it does a good balance, and I also think it's just like I think it's like a good first. It was like the first leadership book that I read because I wasn't really a big reader. I like movies, I like podcasts. It's my generation, I guess. But it was like the first one I read, and I was like, this is pretty awesome. So yeah, I think it's like if you haven't read a leadership book, like I think that's a good first one. I think Jocko's is good too. Like the extreme ownership one is too. Um, Goggins, the Can't Hurt Me is like a classic as well. Like, but that's more of like a motivation than a leadership book, right? But I think that one, The Mission Men and Me, is like a good step in the door. At least it was for me.
Yeah, it's a must. So I don't know if you've gotten the TACPO guide after you got selected, which has like the reading list and all that. So I had that before. I read a lot of those books. I was already reading a bunch of those books before, but I think that book is on that list if I'm not mistaken. One of the books that's on that list that I'm currently reading about Operation Anaconda with Mission Men and Me is, let me pull it up right now. Not a Good Day to Die. So that is by Sean Naylor, and it's the whole Operation Anaconda. So Pete Bladder's mission there, this goes into that whole scenario from what was going on at the talk, at the general level, down to Pete Bladder's level. So it's the overall arching picture of Pete Bladder's book. So that's another good one as well. But I love The Mission Men and Me because, like you said, it ties in, and he does a great job talking it, from the tactical level. Guys on the ground is his big leadership perspective in that book. Listen to the people on the ground. They see it firsthand. And then he brings it up to the higher level where if you're making those big time decisions, you have to know you're looking through a soda straw. You need to get the full perspective. And so two good books there that are it's just a good way to learn. So yeah.
For sure.
Any
Yeah, no,
last
I think
final
it's great.
thoughts?
No, I mean, I think we covered a lot here. Appreciate you having me on. I like what you're doing. It's funny. I met you in person for 5 days, and now we're doing a podcast. Same with like Zane and Will. Again, it shows you go through hard shit. You're gonna become friends and stuff. But yeah, congrats on
I got
the
the
new
airport
kid, man.
marathon
It's
with
exciting.
with Bryce here in September. I think he's going to be doing that with me.
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
thank you.
Where
Yeah,
is
so
that?
that should be any day now. September 21st is the marathon. So
Nice. Okay. How you feeling?
I feel good. I run 2 a year, so I'm
Yeah.
consistently just maintaining that. I got a 100
Oh,
mile
nice.
bike
Okay.
ride in August that I'm doing to help maintain my endurance there. So that'll keep me in check. Really, I'm just trying to work on my
Awesome.
tempo and my pace. So I'm trying to get a little bit faster time. So
Yeah. No, for sure. For sure. Speed work is
all
key.
right. Yep. With that said, my man,
All
I'll let
right.
you continue today. Thank you for joining me. Thank you, everybody, for listening. If you didn't take any notes, I'm going to be upset. I got 2 pages of notes. But I will put your info in the show notes. I'll put the books in there as well. And until next time, my man, appreciate it. And then hang on just for a little bit after.